Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing great. Lots and lots of hugs, and I just hope everybody's well, and I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. It's very exciting. We're on part 3 of our story tonight, and we've learnt that Sharon has a roommate that has been murdered in her apartment block. They don't know who is behind the murder, so the mystery deepens. But we're going to find out where Bigfoot comes into the story. So let's continue. Sharon could not help but think that Freya Warrington was probably running away from her previous roommate, Barry Baldwin. Could he possibly have had something to do with her fortuitous demise? Or was that red character in some way responsible? The man she'd met in the lift who had so conveniently discovered Freya's dead body downstairs in the lobby. Was he responsible for her death? She hoped the police were hot on the trail of the perpetrator, but she wasn't so sure they were, as she thought she would have heard something by now. There would have been a report surely about it on the local news, but she'd heard absolutely nothing. The police, of course, had turned up at her apartment and done a search through all of Freya's things, confiscating her laptop computer from the apartment, and a few other things besides. Sharon had not heard anything from the handsome Detective Cox, and doubted she ever would, which made her feel rather regretful. It was funny, but after she'd met him, her feelings towards her ex-boyfriend Art completely dissipated. There had been something between Sharon and the rather debonair detective after they'd met. A small spark, perhaps. Or was it in her wild, fanciful imagination? "Don't be ridiculous, Sharon," she told herself abruptly. "Why would a man such as Detective Cox want anything to do with someone who wears Red Riding Hood pyjamas? What must he have thought of her? Besides, if he really was interested in you," she told herself firmly, "he might have dropped over to the apartment as an excuse to ask her yet more questions about her roommate. But everything had been very quiet on that front. For all Sharon knew, Detective Cox could be married with a kid, or at the very least in a serious relationship. She decided a man like him, a very handsome one at that, who was definitely a catch, would never need to go on a dating site. He probably had women falling at his feet, begging him for his attention. The thought made her feel rather queasy to the stomach, as she visualized in her mind's eye women throwing their knickers at him, like they do at a rock concert when they fancy the people on stage. "Get a grip," she told herself. "You don't even know the man, and he's making you drool like a dog over a bone. Don't be so ridiculous, it's pathetic. Besides, Detective Cox is definitely not interested in you. What the hell is wrong with you, Sharon?" she reprimanded herself rather severely. Sharon entered Freya Warrington's bedroom with a vacillating hesitancy, pushing open the heavy-weight door ever so slightly, and peering curiously through the crack, almost as if she half expected to see her roommate sitting on the bed, beckoning for her to come in. She pushed the door with a large jerk. It creaked on its hinges and finally opened. She hadn't entered Freya's bedroom since the police had gone through her stuff with a fine tooth comb. Nor had she put up an advertisement for a replacement roommate. As the Warringtons had insisted, the 6 months' rent her daughter had paid her in advance she was to keep. So she was in no hurry to get a new roommate, as it seemed wildly inappropriate in the circumstances. Freya's room looked exactly as she remembered it, but there was a sad emptiness to the space, as if the former occupant of the room was long gone, and even the sweet fragrance of her memory had been erased, which was true, of course, and that made Sharon feel rather downcast. Such a dreadful waste of a young life, she could not help but think, thrown away for no good reason at all. It really wasn't fair. She stoically walked over to Freya's closet and stretched out her arm, pulling off 2 large suitcases lying on top of the closet, covered with all kinds of stickers and slogans. They descended to the floor with a mighty crash. She placed one of the suitcases on the bed and began to fill it up with all Freya's colour-coordinated clothes and shoes, all so neatly organised in her wardrobe. Sharon wondered how anyone could be this fastidiously neat. She wished she'd have had the motivation to colour-code her clothes like this. Sharon was heartily relieved that packing up Freya's things was pretty straightforward. A rather easy job. Freya didn't appear to have a lot of stuff, which meant her car trunk would not be heavily laden with luggage on her trip to North Carolina. It seemed so invasively intrusive to go through a dead person's things, as if she was exploiting Freya's privacy. But this was a job that needed to be done, and in the circumstances she was probably the best person to do it. She had not known Freya terribly well, but against all the odds since her roommate's fortuitous death, she felt a great deal closer to the young lady. It would seem people in the apartment had become very nervous about what had happened over the weekend Freya Warrington tragically lost her life. It was, of course, the single women in the apartment block who were particularly nervous, fearing that what had happened to Freya Warrington was not a once-off event, and something like that could potentially happen to them, as people do tend to personalise things. Ostensibly some female residents had given notice on their apartments and moved away, believing there was a predator lurking in their midst, and that they could potentially be next on the chopping block, like Sharon's immediate next-door neighbour, Brenda Larkin, who moved out days after she learnt the discomposing news about the deceased corpse lying down in the corridor with ligature marks around her neck. The woman who Sharon had never spoken to much since she'd moved in next door had chosen to have a brief chat with her. "I'm leaving this place," she told Sharon. "You would be wise to do exactly the same as me. There could be a serial killer on the loose, living in these apartments among us, lurking in the shadows, to see who else he can take down. I don't feel safe living here anymore. Not after what happened downstairs, let me tell you." "That's understandable," Sharon had said. "As single women, we are more vulnerable. Do you think Red had anything to do with this? Do you know who I'm talking about? He lives in apartment 36. "Red!" laughed the woman. "Definitely not him. I know he looks a little thuggish, but he's harmless, really. He's got some dodgy-looking friends, let me tell you. That I will agree." "Oh yes, I've seen some of his friends getting drunk in the corridor, and rather rowdy. Red found the body, you know." "I know," said Brenda Larkin. "But whoever killed Freya, well, they have to be sick in the head, don't they? And I'll put money on it that it wasn't Red. I know he doesn't give off the best vibes, and he's rather sloppy, but he wouldn't do this. There's someone living among us, I'm telling you. They killed that poor girl. Do you know she was strangled with an electric cord, I believe? I mean, who does that? It's sickening, absolutely sickening. All I can say is thank God she wasn't sexually assaulted. It could have been a lot worse, but someone wanted to hurt her." "No, I didn't know she was strangled with an electric cord. That's news to me. Although I did know she was strangled," Sharon admitted. "I had to identify the body myself, you know." "You did?" asked Brenda, pulling a sympathetic face. "Of course you did. You'd have had to do that, wouldn't you? Given you knew her, didn't you? I saw her a few times going into your apartment. She seemed so nice. I don't envy you. I heard she was your roommate. Even so, it can't be easy identifying a body of someone who's been murdered." "It wasn't too bad. My roommate looked as if she was just sleeping, that's all. I hope you don't mind me giving you some seasoned advice, but if you know what's good for you, you'll do what I'm doing and give your notice in to your landlord. I'm telling you right now, there's a predator among us, and as single woman, I don't think it's safe for us to live here anymore. Once something like this happens, there's no guarantee it's not going to happen again. Think about it. That Freya Warrington was attacked in the downstairs lobby on the ground floor of our apartments. What if it happens again? I'm not going to hang around to find out, that's for sure. Thanks for your advice. I'll think about it long and hard, but I do think that the death of Freya Warrington was actually personal. I don't think there is a murderer in our midst. That's just my opinion. And is it a risk you're willing to take? I wouldn't if I was you." what Sharon had learnt via the grapevine, that it would seem no arrests had been made concerning the case, and over the last month she had experienced numerous sightings of Red around the apartment block. On one occasion she had overheard him talking to a friend of his.
"She was slumped over there. Can you believe that? I tried to wake her up, because I thought she was as drunk as a skunk, but she was bloody dead. It looked like someone had deliberately positioned her like that, propped her up against the wall like a doll, if you know what I mean."
Sharon had not known what to make of Red, but he'd seemed pleased to have been the one to have discovered the deceased body, and rather unruffled by what had happened. But she was sure he would have been interrogated by the police by now, and would surely have been locked up, and the key thrown away, if they had thought he was responsible for Freya's death. So maybe Brenda Larkin was right after all, that Red was harmless. But what about his friends? They were a different story. Some of them looked a tad unsavoury. As Sharon thought about her roommate's death, she could not help but wonder why a random stranger would just pounce on Freya Warrington for no reason at all. She did not believe there was a predator in their midst, like Brenda so obviously did. It made no sense. There was something deeply personal about this murder, as far as she was concerned, and she didn't believe for a second that living in an apartment block imposed any risk for her. As far as she was concerned, someone wanted Freya Warrington dead, but who and why? That was the $1,000,001 question. As Sharon began to empty out Freya's closet, something got her immediate attention. It was a scrunched up piece of paper that in the police search had lightly fallen out of the dustbin, landing on the floor half under the bed. She bent down to retrieve it, to replace it back in the bin. When she opened the paper, to her surprise, there was nothing written on it at all. But then her eyes were drawn to the loose floorboards directly under the bed that she had meant to get fixed a long time ago, but had never done it. For reasons even Sharon could not explain, she found herself pulling back the floorboards to look beneath them, as they were the perfect hidey-hole to hide any of your secrets. And that was when she discovered 2 hardback books lying discreetly hidden beneath them, with Freya's name on the front, and one book marked with the word diary, and the other with the word my private pictures. Of course, Sharon knew the right thing to do would be to call the police, for the information in the diary might be of considerable help to them with their ongoing investigation. But Sharon was curious. It wouldn't hurt to have a little peek, she persuaded herself. It might help her to learn a little bit more about her mysterious roommate, and she wanted to find out exactly why Freya had been killed, and maybe she might find some answers to that question in these books. She had a burning need to know what had happened to Freya on that Friday evening, when she returned home to the apartment, where she'd been jumped and then strangled, and whoever had attacked her had left her looking as if she was lying drunk in the corridor. With trembling hands, and feeling rather guilty about what she was about to do, like someone who knows they're putting their nose where it clearly does not belong, she hesitantly opened the book marked pictures, and looked nervously over her shoulders, almost as if half expecting someone to pull her aside and reprimand her for prying into somebody else's business. But nothing happened. Sharon reasoned with herself that Freya was dead now. She was no longer attached to the material things of this world any more. She was beyond that now. And what harm would it do to look at these private books that Freya had hidden under the floorboards, which suggested she might have something to hide? Either that, or she was terrified of anybody knowing her private and personal business. Freya opened the book marked pictures first. Most of the pictures she scanned through the book was pretty benign, but she realized that Freya was an accomplished artist. One picture was of a butterfly resting on a flower, and Freya had fully captured all the intimate details of its bright colours. Under it was a caption that read, "Butterfly I saw in the meadow today." There was another picture of a mother deer and her fawn. One was of a magnolia tree in blossom, another of a caterpillar. It would seem that Freya had a deep attachment and affinity to the natural world. No wonder she had told Sharon the city wasn't really for her, and she'd only moved here to advance her career in graphic design. That now made perfect sense. When Sharon turned over the next page of the rather benevolent-looking pictures, her eyes were on stalks when the next picture she observed was of a gargantuan-sized male Bigfoot, standing between the trees looking straight ahead of him. The picture was so intricately detailed, so beautifully drawn, and underneath it Freya had written, "I saw him again. He was watching me through some open branches in the trees, eating some leaves. We locked eyes together. He was terribly shy, rather bashful actually, but he glided away. I do hope I see him again. There was something so unique about him that I rarely liked. These things are real. I felt tingles all over my body after the experience. I know what happened to me was so special. I think he wanted me to see him, so I feel honoured that he showed himself to me." Sharon found a few more pictures of the Bigfoot that had previously been drawn in different positions. The captions read, "He's always watching me. He's so dreadfully curious. I'm not afraid of him at all because he means me no harm. I really like his energy. He's comical and kind." Another caption read, "When I was walking in the woods this morning, I was hoping to see him again. I was feeling really down in the dumps because my mother's sister passed away from stage 4 cancer. I was grieving her loss. I don't know if the Bigfoot could pick up on my sorrow, but I think he could because he showed himself to me again. I saw him very clearly through the trees. He threw an apple at me. I think he wants to be my friend, and that made me feel so happy. He is, of course, painfully shy. I took the apple and ate it, while he continued to peek at me through the shrubbery, watching me all the time. I detected what I can only describe as a friendly twinkle in his dark eyes, as if he was saying, 'I'm glad to see you again.' I genuinely think he was pleased when I ate the apple he'd thrown for me. He whistled and clapped his hands. I genuinely think he was pleased that I accepted his gift. I was so touched he would do something so nice for me like this. I think he's getting used to me being around. The only reason I go into the woods as often as I do is because I hope to see him. But he's so elusive, and yet I always know he's there. When other members of my family go into the woods, they see nothing at all, which makes my random encounters with him all the more special. I think that this Bigfoot's taken a shine to me, for some reason, which is why he revealed himself to me. I do believe I would not have seen him if he'd not wished me to do so. I always sense him watching me, even when I can't see him at all. I don't encounter him every time I go into the woods. It's so weird to experience that. It's like he wears an invisible cloak, so that it's almost impossible to see him. I admit I'm growing increasingly curious about him, as he is about me. The feeling is mutual, and yet I think we're both cautious about getting comfortable with each other. He's incredibly human to look at in every regard. I'll never ever tell anyone about him, not in a million trillion years. Even if people say Bigfoot is real, I'll never agree with them on that. I don't want people intruding on this creature's space. He deserves to live a peaceful, long and contented life. The good news is many people don't believe that Bigfoot exists. I'd like to keep it that way. The creatures deserve to live among us without being harassed. I went online and read so many horrible, nasty, mean things about Bigfoot. I'm talking about horrible, horrible, horrible things. There are people out there that want to actually kill these creatures. They've been described as dangerous. Maybe some of them are. I have no knowledge of these things. I can only talk from my own personal experience. I know unequivocally the Bigfoot I'm seeing is nicer than a whole lot of humans I've met over the years. So I think the bad press has got to be exaggerated. Either that or, like human beings, you get good and bad Bigfoots. But the one I've encountered is very benevolent. Then another caption read, "I was walking alone in the woods today. I could feel the Bigfoot around me, sense his benevolent energy, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I thought I wasn't going to see him, as I hardly ever do. But on this particular occasion I saw some shrubbery move on its own, and a comical-looking cone-shaped head began peering at me through the undergrowth. looking at me with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. I stood still and just watched the Bigfoot. He pushed the undergrowth back and walked straight out of the trees towards me, swinging his arms and legs backwards and forwards. His movements were so graceful for one so large. I think he'd grown used to me being around. He's beginning to slowly but surely trust me. I was amazed by his sheer size. I mean, he was gargantuan. My drawings don't give any idea of his size, but I think he could have easily been over 9 foot tall. I don't think my pictures convey his muscle definition adequately enough, and his huge ponderous shoulders. I just wish I could do his eyes justice in my pictures, like they are in real life, but I can't catch his essence, that bright, incredible sparkle. It's like his eyes are like the twinkling stars you see in the sky at night. There's an energy about him that I can't explain, that pulls you right in. It was like I wanted to be close to him, so some of this energy could rub off on me in some way. I couldn't believe it when he indicated for me to stretch out my hand. He was hiding something behind his back, and he pulled out an apple for me. I took it, laughed, and gave him a big smile. We both stood there staring at each other. He had an apple for himself as well, so we ate together. I know it sounds really strange, but he spoke to me in my head telepathically. He just said 2 words, "You're nice," and then glided away. I asked myself, of course, if I'd imagined those words. I've been going over them again and again in my head, but I know he said, "You're nice." I wish I'd said it back to him, because he really is very nice. The final caption about the Bigfoot underneath another drawing read, "I came home from the weekend from Atlanta. I went to the woods looking for him. I wish I had a name I could call him by. It would be so much easier that way. My mother cannot understand this fixation of mine to keep going into the woods soon after I get home. But I can't help myself, can I? I really want to see my Bigfoot friend. He's my best-kept secret, a secret I will take with me to the grave if I have my way." I felt really bad because my brother Stuart offered to accompany me into the woods. I refused his request. I was worried if he came along with me that there would be absolutely no chance of my seeing my Bigfoot friend. Furthermore, he wanted to bring Buffy into the woods with us, and that rambunctious, overexcitable dog would scare anything off. I think poor Stuart thought I was giving him the brush off. He looked a little put out, as I haven't seen him in over 3 weeks. But I was so eager to see my Bigfoot friend. How could I tell him about that? I just said I fancied a walk alone. I had been walking in the woods for quite some time, and then I heard what I can only describe as these thunderous feet moving towards me. The next thing I heard twigs snapping, leaves being crunched, and heavy breathing. Then I saw him pulling back the shrubbery, walking towards me. He had a warm, friendly twinkle in his eyes, but there was a troubled, somewhat unsettled, disquieted look on his face, almost as if something was really beginning to bother him. He indicated for me to stretch out my hand. I did as he said, thinking he was going to give me another one of his apples that we would be able to share together. But instead he gave me a black stone, which he placed in my palm, folding my fingers over the stone so that I was holding it tightly in my hands. He looked at me and said, "Keep the stone to absorb the darkness. It wants to take you away. Don't let it get you." I looked at the stone and then back at the Bigfoot, and we stared at each other. I said nothing. I was thinking in my mind, did he really speak to me like that? And an answer came back to me. "Of course I spoke to you. You need to stay safe. Keep the stone with you at all times. Don't let it out of your sight. It's very important. It will protect you." On the weekend I'd left the stone on my nightstand, and unfortunately the cleaner threw it away. I mean, why would she do a thing like that? It made me feel really bad that she had thrown it out. I felt slightly intimidated that the Bigfoot said that the darkness wanted to take me away. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but it's really scary. I do regret not having the stone to protect me. I asked the cleaner why she threw it away. She said it looked like a piece of coal. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life. That stone was full of sparkly stuff, bits of gold and silver, bits of red. It was unique. It was stunning. Let me tell you, it was not a piece of coal. My mother's cleaner seriously needs a pair of glasses." As Sharon read the last caption, her blood went icy cold. Had the Bigfoot that Freya encountered in the woods on her parents' land given her the black stone to keep her safe? Had he perceived that Freya was in grave danger? Sharon stared incredulously at the pictures and the captions under them. It was clear that this was a book she was not meant to see, and this was one she would never show to anyone, as based on what Freya had written in her captions, she wanted no one to know about her Bigfoot encounter or about her unusual friend, and Sharon wanted to honour her wish. Sharon had never given the cryptid creatures much thought. It was not that she hadn't believed or disbelieved in the subject of Bigfoot. She had always just assumed that Bigfoot was a fictitious character, like Father Christmas and the Easter Bunny. But now she knew differently. There was no doubt in Sharon's mind that Freya's Bigfoot encounter in the woods, on her family's property in North Carolina, was very real, and she was rather intrigued by this revelation, and not entirely sure what to make of it all. Sharon then rather gingerly opened the second book, not totally sure what she would find. She was surprised to see that it was a diary with not many exciting entries, but it was towards the end of the diary that it began to look interesting, giving Sharon a bird's-eye view as to why Freya Warrington had been so eager to move in with her. She ran her eyes through many of the comments which she read. "Tuesday the 12th. I wish I hadn't moved in with him. His name is Barry Baldwin. I mean, he seemed harmless enough when I first met him, and the apartment was ever so attractive. I didn't think it would be a problem. He told me he had a girlfriend who lived with him at the flat. I believed him, but now I don't believe he was telling me the truth. I mean, when I returned to the apartment this evening, there was no sign of his so-called girlfriend anywhere around. I also had a profound sense he was waiting up for me. I didn't like that one little bit. I'm not answerable to him. I'm not a kid. When I got into the apartment, the way he was looking at me, well, it wasn't good. I felt distinctly uncomfortable, ill at ease. I think he might actually fancy me, and that's part of the problem. He asked me if I wanted a drink, so I said no thanks. I hurriedly went into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't feel particularly safe. I'm really beginning to regret not moving in with a girl. I feel uneasy about my new living circumstances. There's something rather off about Barry Baldwin. And if he's got a girlfriend, why is he not living with her? Those inappropriate looks, I keep thinking about them. I know I'm not imagining this. Thursday the 15th. I got into the apartment last night. Everything was quiet. Very quiet. Uncomfortably so. But I hasten to say I felt relief that Barry Baldwin wasn't waiting up for me at the late hours of the night. It would have freaked me out if I was to have a repeat of Tuesday night, with him asking me to join him for a drink and looking at me with that hungry look in his eyes. I mean, I barely know the man. We've exchanged a few pleasantries of sorts, and that's about it. The truth is, I don't want to get to know him. I don't believe he has a girlfriend. Why is there no sign of a woman's presence around the flat? Unless, of course, they recently broke up. When I applied to live at the apartment, he said his girlfriend lived at the flat most of the time. It was this revelation that made me feel comfortable about moving in with a man. There would have been 3 of us living here. But I think this girlfriend is bogus. I don't believe she exists. Everything around the apartment is so masculine now I come to think about it. There's nothing to suggest a woman has ever been around this place. I was heartily relieved to get into my bedroom, to close the door behind me, plunge the key into my lock. I think the moment I hit my bed, I was out like a light. But at one point of the night, I had an ever so lucid dream. It felt so startlingly real, and I'm beginning to think it may well have been. I was looking up from my bed through dozy eyes. Barry Baldwin was there, standing in my bedroom, staring at me so gormlessly. It was the weirdest experience of my life. I don't know what to make of it. I've been telling myself to stop being so ludicrous. As of course, how could Barry have got into a locked room? Unless, of course, he has a spare key. I've been telling myself this was a nasty, inauspicious dream. But why? Why did it feel so real? And that feeling of him just standing there in my room, staring at me, is so disquieting. It had to have been a dream, surely. But there was a strange after-smell in my room, following that dream. I have no idea where that came from. Saturday the 17th. Last night it happened again. I enjoyed a few drinks and some pizzas with friends after work. I got back to the apartment at about 12:30. I bumped into Barry Baldwin in the hallway. Talk about bad timing. He claimed he'd only got back and asked me to join him for a drink. I told him I was far too tired and needed to go to bed. I swear he looked quite put out by that. I might even go so far to say as he looked angry, but I couldn't be sure. It was so unfortunate to bump into him like that. I had sincerely hoped I'd be able to avoid him, but there he was, like a bad smell that never seems to abate. He was watching me as I went into my bedroom. I am regretting so very much having moved in here. It was a catastrophic mistake on my part. There is something not right about that man. When I got into bed, I pretty much floated away into sleep. But I had that lurid dream again. There he was, Barry Baldwin, standing there in my bedroom. This time he was smoking as he watched me sleeping. In my dream I could smell that smoke and see his face just leering at me. It was so creepy. Once again, when I woke up from my dream, I felt visibly shaken. It had felt vividly real to me. But the horrifying thing was I found a cigarette stub on my floor the following morning. How can I explain that? I don't smoke, so I believe Barry has been letting himself into my room, opening my bedroom with a spare key he obviously owns, just watching me sleep. Furthermore, there was that strange smell in the room again. I was so freaked out. I had to call a locksmith at once to change the key to my door. This can never ever happen again. But one thing is clear. I need to move out as soon as possible. I can't hang around with a creep like that. Sunday the 18th. How I wish I'd spent the weekend with my parents at home in North Carolina. But unfortunately I had far too much to do. But when I went to bed last night with the locks now safely changed, I heard someone fumbling around with them during the night, trying to enter my bedroom. I knew at once it was Barry Baldwin. I now know for sure those dreams of mine were not fictitious dreams at all. I believe he's been creeping into my bedroom, sometimes smoking and just watching me while I sleep. I mean, how creepy is that? I'm not sure how he can do this to me without me waking up fully alert. But I'm wondering if that strange smell in my room that he's been burning keeps me sedated or something, so he can watch me sleep without me being consciously aware of his absurd nocturnal activities. The man is sick, seriously sick, deranged. Why the hell did I agree to move in with him? If my mother had any idea this was going on, she would do her nut. But I told her I'm living with a close friend, so I cannot tell her the truth. I have to sort this mess out myself. Monday the 19th. When I got back to the apartment, Barry was waiting up for me in the living room, like a father waiting up for his teenage daughter, who is not amused because she's returned home past her curfew. It felt rather like that. I could tell he was slightly inebriated.
"Where have you been?"
he asked me, slurring his words. He had a beer bottle in his hands. He was waving it around. I was shocked because it was none of his business where I'd been. "I've been working late," I told him curtly.
"Liar! You're a liar!"
he said, slamming his beer bottle on the couch. It rolled on its side, parking itself against a cushion.
"You're seeing someone behind my back. I know you are. That's what's going on here, isn't it? You've been seeing someone."
"Excuse me, Barry. I'm not your girlfriend," I said. It doesn't matter if I'm seeing anyone or not. It's none of your business. I'm your roommate, nothing more. Who I see is of no concern to you. I think you've had too much to drink, Barry. The alcohol's gone straight to your head, making you say things you're going to regret in the morning. I'll pretend I never heard what you said." Barry got up from his chair and hobbled over towards me.
"Why are you being so aloof, so cold-hearted, so indifferent? You're a bitch. You know that? A real bitch. You didn't move in here just to be my roommate, did you? You know that. I know that. There's more going on between us, isn't there? Don't deny it. You feel it too."
"I don't feel anything. I think you're drunk, Barry. Let me go to my bedroom," I said hurriedly, feeling desperate need to get away from him. I could hear him ranting when I went into my room. He began throwing beers at the walls, and I kept hearing him say,
"Oh, she's a bitch. She's a bitch. She'll pay for this. She'll pay for this."
When I locked my door during the night, I felt very apprehensive. Red lights were flashing in my head. I knew I needed to get away from this place. Barry was not right in the head. I'm genuinely scared of the man. I don't know what he's capable of. I'm going to make some calls and see if I can find another flat share. This is absolutely not working out. I seem to remember Kate Barlow telling me there's a young lady by the name of Sharon who's looking for a new flatmate. I'll give her a call in the morning. Tuesday the 20th. I went to see this lady Kate had told me about. I was so nervous. Her name is Sharon. She seemed really nice, but I was so terrified she was going to not let me move in straight away. But thankfully she did. I couldn't believe my luck. I was out of Barry's place so fast. I never have to see that awful man again as long as I live. I left him a note telling him it wasn't working out. I don't doubt he won't be best pleased. I'm pretty sure that man has a violent temper on him. I'm not surprised he hasn't got a girlfriend. He's far too wacko for a relationship of any kind. No woman in their right mind would date a man like that. All I can say is thank God I didn't pay him an advance in the rent, or otherwise I really would be in a financial pickle. As Sharon read Freya's diary, she had a full insight of what Freya had been going through days before she'd moved in with her. It would seem her accounts of believing Barry Baldwin had been watching her while she was sleeping were very disquieting. It was hardly surprising she'd left the apartment in such a hurry. Could it be that Barry Baldwin was behind her fortuitous passing? Had he managed to find out where she lived and come after her, wreaking his revenge? Sharon knew that she needed to call Detective Cox right away. It wasn't long before he arrived at her front door. She led him into the apartment, wishing once again she was wearing something a little bit more fetching. The man was so handsome. She made sure to check whether he was wearing a ring on his finger or not, but there was no ring. She drew in a sigh of relief.
"What is all this about, Sharon? You said it was urgent. I assume there is something that you are going to tell me to do with the fortuitous death of your roommate. Am I right about that?"
"But of course. I'm going up to the funeral in North Carolina. I'm staying with the Warringtons. I've been packing up a suitcase with all of Freya's things to take with me, as Mrs. Warrington, well, she didn't want to go through her daughter's stuff, as you can imagine. She said it would be far too upsetting for her. She asked me to do it instead."
"So you're going to the funeral? I thought it was only for close family and friends."
"Well, Mrs. Warrington seems to think that me and her daughter were very close. I mean, how could I tell her the truth? So I went along with it. It seemed like the kindest thing to do. I think Freya told her parents she was moving in with a close friend, so they felt comfortable of her living alone in a city, you see."
"I see. So you called me here to tell me this, did you?"
he said, raising an eyebrow, his eyes catching Sharon's for a brief moment. She was sure she'd felt a spark between them, but he was so professional. There was no chink in this man's armour. "No, that's not the reason I called you, Detective Cox. It's this," said Sharon, holding out a diary for the detective to read. Detective Cox took the diary from Sharon.
"Where did you find this?"
Well, I think Freya hid it under the floorboards under her bed. I removed the floorboards to look if she had hidden anything in there, and sure enough, I found the diary there."
"I see," said the detective, looking into Sharon's eyes with an amused glint. "I take it, Sharon, that you've read this, have you?"
Sharon flushed. "I admit I did, but I wanted to see if there was anything in there that the police might find of interest."
"We find everything of interest, Sharon. You should have called us at once."
"I know, and I'm sorry about that," said Sharon, raising a defensive hand. "But I just thought I'd read a little."
"How little is a little, Sharon?"
Sharon's face became as red as a field of poppies. All right, I confess I read the whole thing. I care about Freya Warrington, you see. I want the man responsible for her death to be locked away for life." Detective Cox was grinning broadly.
"You'd make a good detective, Sharon. Snooping can be quite handy in our profession, and you don't seem to be adverse to it. Do you fancy doing my job?"
"No, of course I don't, Detective," said Sharon rather tentatively. "Detective Cox, when you read Freya's entries, you'll realise why she abandoned living with Barry Baldwin, why she moved in with me. The man was creepy. He broke into her bedroom during the night to watch her sleep. Who does that?"
"He did what?"
asked Detective Cox, his face growing pale. "So you agree with me that that is weird?"
"It's not normal. Thank you for the diary, Sharon. I will be in touch."
"Wait, Detective Cox. How is the investigation over Freya's death going? It's just I've heard nothing. It's so frustrating."
"Well, we're chasing up new leads, Sharon. But this diary might be the very thing to change the case for us. Thank you for bringing this matter to my attention."
"It's only a pleasure, Detective," said Sharon, who had no intention of ever showing Detective Cox, or anyone else for that matter, the pictures of the Bigfoot in the book marked My Private Pictures, which she had decided she'd probably have to burn. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.